It does rain in Granite Falls, doesn't it?
No, that was all fake rain. Just kidding. Yeah.
I guess you have to plan around that, right? I mean,
Well,
or is that just you accept
I'll
it?
just jump into the anecdote about that, which is that, this is the 7th film I've shot in Washington State, and I was raised there, and I live there now, and I know it well. And so I very much planned for it. Jay was heavily involved I'll tell you the story of how we got the script, how we started co-writing, but suffice to say, he came in and actually we started trading drafts of the script kind of late in the process, and he kept adding exterior scenes. And I finally had to say, Jay, you realize we're not shooting this in California. This is going to be November in Washington State. It's going to be raining constantly. And his immediate response was just, oh, you never see rain on screen. It's going to be so great. So, of course, we had to find, so they didn't look like drowned rats the whole time. We had to find, I found awnings and eaves and picnic shelters and things for them to hide under. But the poor crew, of course, is just like drenched the entire time in their ponchos out there. Everybody's just up to their knees in mud. Yeah, it was a very wet experience. But it does certainly give you a sense of place, doesn't it?
And also the bicycle riding. I mean, that's something that figures in a number of your films. And what's interesting about it is bicycle riding is also a state of mind because you do it to express how you're feeling at certain times. And I remember in one of your films, a character got so mad he just broke up the bicycle. He just like threw it and kicked it. And
Jay's brother Mark.
Yeah.
That movie, by the way, you said you could see most of my stuff on Hulu and Amazon Prime, but Your Sister is on Netflix, so you can't see that one on Netflix, I believe. Yeah. But they're all streaming somewhere, I guess. So.
Which is nice for you, right?
It's fantastic. Yeah, it's
you
great.
get like a check in the mail from them? Or?
Oh, no. No.
Now, you mentioned you traded drafts up and back. Can you tell us a little bit about why you decided to make the movie and how that came?
Yeah, so a lot of my movies have started with a muse who is an actor. So I'm a very actor-obsessed kind of director, and I just get, like, lightly, I sort of stalk people and force them to work with me. But Jay was the one who really inspired the film because I really, really wanted to work with him. I saw him on Transparent. He came to acting rather late at the age of like 40, and a few years ago we started acting, and I just was completely blown away by his acting, and I already knew him as a lovely human being. I had met him through his brother, who I've worked with twice, Hump Day and Your Sister. He acted in those 2 films. But they also, Jay and Mark make movies together, so I knew Jay as a filmmaking peer. And then as soon as I saw him acting, I just was like, oh my God, I have to work with you. So I told him I would be lightly stalking him until I got on set with him. And then the thing that intrigued me about this particular character for him, basically what I do is I sort of think of this actor and they're in my head, and then I sort of try on different roles in them, with them in my mind's eye, and like different scenarios and in relationship with other characters. So I came up with this idea, which had been inspired by sort of other reasons, but I realized, oh, maybe he'd be that person. And at first, it didn't occur to me right away, but because it's a stretch for him, all the roles he's done. I don't know if you know him as Josh Pfefferman in Transparent, but very different, sort of a Silver Lake, bougie kind of hipster guy, very different guy. And he's closer, his life experience is closer to his Josh Pfefferman character. Not that he's anything like that guy, but that world is closer to his experience than this, certainly, but by a long shot. So I wasn't sure if he'd be interested in stretching, to find this other character, but I pitched it to him when it was really nascent. It was kind of like I had all the backstory very clear in my mind, the 20 years in prison and what the favorite teacher, the favorite relationship. When a teacher kind of see a spark in somebody and they think maybe that guy could get out of this economically depressed town, maybe he could go to college even, she sort of saw this little spark in him, and then boom, right out of high school, he ends up in this ridiculous situation that gets him into prison, and she just feels terrible and is the only one who sticks around. So I had all of that up to basically the first day of the, that he gets out of jail. And I pitched that to him, and he immediately said yes. And then from the beginning, I was developing it over the course of, say, 7-8 months as a treatment. And I would share it with him back and forth, and he would give me notes. And then when it turned into a script, the last few months, we just started trading drafts. He was always really heavily involved, and then we really became co-writers sort of later in the process.
I mean, one of the things I find very interesting in the movie is that though it's Chris's story coming back after 20 years, but it's also so much Carol's story and her finding her own voice and her own life after being in this marriage that isn't really working.
Yeah, she's kind of, not to be, but she is sort of in her own prison, right? So she's kind of, even though she's free, there's a lot of things that are sort of imprisoning her, and she's, they sort of awaken in each other the realization that maybe there's something more. There's something for her. It's like, oh, maybe this isn't enough. Maybe it's okay to want more. Maybe there's something else.
Do you have to like both characters when you're writing? And
say that again.
Do you have to like both characters, or
oh
how
yeah.
do you?
I have to like everybody. Yeah, Tom was probably the hardest to relate to. But I mean, I totally get him. I know people like him. I know the husband. Just really kind of, they get to a certain age and they sort of get stuck in the whatever they've boxed in for themselves, their little box, and they just are like, that. Well, this is it. This is the bed I've made myself. I'm going to lie in it, and and we just have to kind of soldier through and really terrified of of anything else, of trying to break out or do something else. So, but I had lots of compassion for him too. I really have compassion for all of my characters. Yeah.
One of the things you mentioned earlier is about acting and how much you love performers, and I wonder for the two leads in the movie how you enable them to find their characters. I don't know if you did rehearsal with them or what that would
I'm
be
not
like.
big on rehearsing, but what I am big on is spending, and usually the budgets of the films that I've worked on haven't allowed for a lot of they can't really arrive with a lot of extra time. But as much time as I can get, I mean, like Laggies was the film I made before this, and Keira Knightley and Chloe Moretz had to be dear friends, and I took them out for like a 4-hour dinner, the night before we started shooting, as soon as they both got to town. And it's really just as much time as I can get to spend with the other actors and have them spend time with each other. It's really interesting how just that, and the way that all the actors I've worked with have been such lovely human beings, and they all come with open arms and open hearts towards each other. I mean, Your Sister Sister is another great example of how Rosemary DeWitt was actually replaced an actress at the very, like literally the 9th hour. It was like 2 days before we lost our actor, 2 days before the shoot. And she came in like an angel and saved the film. And she flew up to this little island. Emily Blunt was already there, and the two of them were living in the same, I put them in the same house, and they stayed up most of the night, and they just bonded. And the next day, boom, they were sisters. I mean, it was spectacular. But the more time you can spend just chatting and talking and getting used to each other's presence and creating that trust is really great. And then on set, it's all about creating a completely emotionally safe, performance-oriented set. So I very carefully choose each of the crew members, just like I choose the cast. There are folks that I absolutely love as, to hang out with, and over a beer, but I can't work with them because I know that they respond to stress in a way that it's going to put, me on edge, or, it's going to feel sort of toxic, or add a negativity to the atmosphere that I do not want at all. It has to be very, very focused and friendly and warm, and really focused on creating on emotional safety, because it's very risky. I mean, I always say that everybody's working their ass off on set, but nobody has a harder job than the actor. And the actors who are really good at it make it look so easy. So you can forget, you take it for granted, but it's really hard to remain that emotionally available in this really artificial setting with these other people staring at you and weird, equipment in their face. And obviously somebody like Edie, who has so much experience, it becomes easier over the years, but it's still really, really hard. So it's important to, I think, to really acknowledge that and create a safe space for them. And you just get better performances. It's all selfish, for me, because I'm just going to get the best out of everybody, I've noticed.
Do you wait for time into production, maybe, a few weeks in, that you would do the hotel scene where they talk about how much they care about each other and I love you. And
Yeah,
did you
if
know you were the
possible,
one?
for sure. You can't always. You can't. It's very. I've had one experience. Hump Day, I actually was able to shoot the entire thing in order, which was such a gift because we actually could get to a scene and say, you know what, we're going to rewrite this scene, and it's okay because everything that comes after it, we can rewrite if there's any ramifications. Normally, you can't do that. You have the script ahead of time, and then you're only in one location for so many days, and so if however many scenes appear in that location, you have to shoot it all out of order just for efficiency's sake. And yeah, when I'm sitting down with my assistant director, who is responsible for boarding it up, for creating the schedule, we try to put those really intimate scenes later, the important scenes. We can't always do it, it's really, but yeah, that's what we venture to do.
Where in the production was that shot?
Gosh, let me see. I don't think it was, so the whole production was 20 days, and then Edie's, I feel like Edie was pretty, it was maybe 12 of them or something like that. And so those were all condensed. And I would say, I don't think it was the very last day, but it was at least halfway through her days, and luckily she knew, she didn't know him well, but Jay and she had met on the set of another film, of Gillian Robespierre's movie Landline. They were they only had a couple scenes together and only a couple of days on set together, but just really had a great vibe off of each other already. So I think she was really felt like, oh, this would be a wonderful person to, be co-leads with, and then she loved the script as well. But that really helped because they already sort of had a sense of comfort with each other.
I noticed when you were watching the film again this evening that there were moments when the characters would say something that was humorous. You would laugh. You were really enjoying it. So I wonder if on the set you laugh too, or what it's like for you.
Oh, you can't stop me from laughing. Yes, and in fact, in my comedies, it's sometimes very difficult because I have to restrain myself during the takes. But yeah, no, there have been some really wonderful experiences where everybody's just holding in their laughter, and then as soon as I say cut, we all just let it all out. And in general, there is, yes, the emotional safety and the affability, humor just naturally comes along with that. So I have a lot of very funny people on my set as well.
I noticed in the past you've either co-edited or edited your own films, and you mentioned that being your background. This one not. You had another editor. So
yeah.
I wonder.
Well, I've given the credit. My first two films, I edited. I was the final. I sort of had somebody who sort of started me off, and then I really was the real editor at the end. But I gave them co-editing credit. And then the third and fourth films, and fifth, let me see. No, fifth was that. I'm sorry, I'm getting them all confused. The third and fourth films, Hump Day and Your Sister, Nat Sanders, who ended up being nominated for an editing award, Oscar for Moonlight, and edited that Oscar-winning film. He was my editor, and then I went back to the edit chair with Touchy Feely, which was a very, very personal film, and one that, I just wanted to go back into the chair. And then Laggy's, Nat also only got the sole editing credit as well. But as a director who, for me, it all comes together in the edit room. I can't tell you how much rewriting happened on this film, really on all my films, but in this film, a lot of cutting things down, of, playing around, adding a little bit of ADR here and there, changing the order of scenes. All kinds of stuff happened in the edit room. So it really is true that the final draft of the script happens in the edit room. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that I just think like an editor. So it's like a two-headed monster in there. Like, I know a lot of directors who don't spend that much time in the edit room. They just kind of give notes. They come in and they watch and they give notes, then they leave the editor alone. And I just can't imagine that. I'm always there. So it's kind of like this two-headed monster. It's kind of like having two editors in there. But I don't ever take over the keyboard. I let him or her do that.
So what surprised you when you were going through the edit and you were making changes then? Were there things in it that you felt, well, maybe an audience needs to know this later, or we can take that out, it's redundant? Or?
It was a really fascinating experience because it's the first time that I ever had the first cut, the first assemble of the movie. Generally, all of my films have been under they've been around 90 minutes or around there, a little over, a little bit under. And they start out, you know, a little bit over that, but maybe 100 or something. They're not really super long. The first cut of this film, this was a big deal for me. It was a little over 2.5 hours long. And it freaked me out because I'm a 90-minute gal, you know. Now, also, it ended up being 110 minutes, which I gave myself permission because I started looking at the lengths of other films that felt like, you know, of the genre, because it was like, oh, this is my first drama. All of my others have been comedic, at least dramatic comedies, right? So I gave myself permission to make it a little bit longer because that story needed the time. But yeah, it really scared me. And so I cut out just huge, you know, sea stories and entire characters. And then what ended up happening was we were able to find, so for a long time, for instance, when she breaks into the house with him, and he freaks out, and you see a little glimpse of this project that she's doing in there, you know, that whole scene was cut. The chair-wrapped scene in their with the brothers, you know, Ben's character, like Ted not knowing what's happening, and that was all cut. And I'm so happy. This time I was just like, God, I'm so happy it's here because it's such a, I don't know, it feels like such a reward somehow. I love that scene. But it used to be a lot longer. Those scenes used to be much longer and clunkier. And then there were a couple of other scenes that really didn't work at all. There was a whole other character. It was really like, it was this whole long, big sort of CD story. And so I originally just cut the entire thing out. And you did have that one house, the burnt out house was the only thing remaining. But putting back, realizing, oh, we can put this version back in, and that kind of gives a little bit of lightness, or, you know, so it was interesting to come back to certain, you know, I went really bare bones and cut a whole bunch of stuff, and then I started to put things back in again, but in different forms, you know, and like, oh, I don't have to have an entire, like maybe I just have a glimpse of this or a glimpse of that, and you know, so it was all about balance, you know. It was very, very interesting, challenging, but really interesting process.
Why do you think this one ran long? I mean, because some of the earlier films you mentioned were so precise in terms of the length of the movie.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was just a really ambitious script. It was a really ambitious script. I can't believe we shot it in 20 days, honestly. It was a lot, and it was very, very low budget, so we had a very tiny crew. We didn't have big box trucks. Those scenes of him bicycling at night, and with her too, all the night bicycling scenes, we had to go scout and find, you know, streets with street lights, and then we had to use a very specific camera. We used a different camera for that, just those scenes that could handle that low light, and not like look weird, and the color wouldn't go strange and stuff, because we had no money to exterior night light scenes. That's the most expensive thing you can do on a movie shoot, is to have big night exteriors with, like, you know, moving through lots of spaces. So we couldn't like add lights to the street lights or anything. We just had to use available light. So yeah, things like that, like really ambitious for a very, very low budget film, and many, many scenes and lots of characters and lots. So it was just ended up, yeah, being a lot.
In 20 days, that means your schedule, you started early and ended late, right?
Yeah, but we didn't have, you know, I really like to what they call make our days, which means, you know, you are within a 12-hour day. It's really important to me because it gets dangerous if you go longer than that. You don't get the best work out of people. You get resentment out of people. It all makes sense to me because, you know, I mean, I don't want to be, you know, I'm a certain age. I need my sleep. It's my most precious commodity.
You don't go around yelling at your crew like
I'm not a huge yeller. No, not so much. And I also am, again, I really thank God I was an editor, because I usually can get what I need within 2, 3, 4 takes, because I know what I need and I know when I have it and when to move on. So I'm pretty efficient.
Do you show your actors the film as it goes on?
Oh, God, no.
No.
Jay was a producer, you know, so he was a different animal. But normally, no, not like Edie or Caitlin. No, I would never just show an actor, no.
Okay. Let's go to the audience and see if they have any questions. Anyone like to go first? Okay.
So the question is about the chair wrapping scene at the end in Chris's house and whether it was an act of forgiveness. Yeah, I mean, I really think it's one of those situations that is totally open to interpretation. And I think all those things you just said, that maybe it was just an act of sort of it's okay or acceptance or maybe true forgiveness, or somewhere on the spectrum. Maybe it's just sort of a reach out, like a hey, like I'm open to, it's not like I never want to speak with you again or whatever, sort of a friendly little nod to, and it's like an inside joke because he knows, that's her, so it's a nice little signal. But yeah, definitely open to interpretation. And I'm definitely a filmmaker who doesn't like to spoon feed too much. And that's another balancing act in the edit process. So for instance, all the exposition, there's a lot of backstory. But I didn't want to, and we all know the backstory, all the actors, were really versed in exactly like, everything that happened beforehand. But the backstory doesn't exist so that we can like have some third, sort of some exterior character, reiterate it all for the audience. It's basically just to create that sense of chemistry and real, connection between the actors that you see on screen, and then giving enough breadcrumbs for the audience to be intrigued. Like first, it's usually question marks. It's like, okay, what's the nature of this relationship? What's going on? What happened before? Why is he looking out the window that way in the very first shot of the movie? And then slowly starting to be able to put together enough pieces to be satisfied without maybe knowing every single little detail. So you still have enough, blanks to fill in yourselves. And I find that it engages the audience a little bit, and it's not insulting to the audience to make them feel like they have to be spoon-fed every single dang thing, but I don't want to frustrate people either. So it's an interesting balance. One of the last things we put in there was that sound design when he goes back to the scene of the crime, which is not something that I usually do, something like that. But it just seemed like, this is it's a little bit more of an elegant way to get across what really, just a glimpse of what happens in this kind of, slightly abstracted way, as opposed to having somebody say, well, what some long extended conversation about what exactly happened or what have you.
How did it originally appear in the screenplay?
Well, for instance, right now, in the way it ended up in the final cut, there was a longer conversation between Hildy's character and her boss, Courtney, or manager, Courtney. So he said, I can't believe he killed a guy, he's just a puppy dog. And then Hildy's now just says, no, he was just sort of wrong place, wrong time kind of thing. He was just trying to get some beer. Well, that used to sort of go on longer. And it just felt clunky. It just felt like exposition. Felt like, this is bumming me out. I think that was one spot. There may have been another spot. I can't remember. We had a number of options, So I sat next to Edie. Didn't get a chance to see it at Toronto, but she came to South by Southwest a couple weeks ago, and she sat next to me. And she saw it for the first time. And right after it ended, she said, I kept thinking, wasn't there more to this scene? As I was watching, remembering like when we were shooting it, and then immediately thinking, it's so good you cut that. The thing you cut, it was like, what, wasn't there something else? Oh yeah, it's really good you cut that. So there's a lot of that. It was a lot of like giving ourselves options, maybe saying a little too much on set, but then I knew I would have the option to take it out later.
Is it ever nerve-wracking for you to show an actor the film for the first time, because they know what was shot and they're looking for certain things that they did, and maybe because you want to make it better or you want to make them look better or whatever, it's not in there anymore.
Sure. Well, in general, I just started, when she started gushing to me about it, she seemed to sincerely love the film, and I just started weeping. I was really like, it really is like all I wanted was for Edie to like this movie. Because she's so amazing. She was such a dreamboat to work with. This is honest to God, honest to truth. This is a real story that the very first day on set, there was no trailer. Again, it's tiny production. No trailers, no fancy, nothing. Like she just sit in a tent with, terrible heater and with everybody else, whatever. Anyway, her first day, she's wrapped, she's done. She says, am I done? Can I help with crafty? Seriously. God's truth, she wanted to help with the snack table. Yeah, no, she is a salt of the earth. She was so great to everybody, super sweet, and just, of course, completely engaged as a collaborator. And I mean, I just cannot say enough about the woman.
Does I don't know if she projected what happens later, or if that's even necessary, but the way you leave it in the film is that, you know, she says, "Can we have lunch sometime from where we are now?" And he says, "Sure." What do you think happens?
What do you think happens, Ralph?
Or what did she think happens? I think they become friends.
Yeah.
That's what I believe.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
Not sure if Tom comes back. Maybe he does too, but they become friends. No.
I don't think Tom.
Okay. Tom's gone.
I think
She's moved on. Tom
She's
is
moved
gone.
on. Yeah. I think you might be right. I like to believe that they still retain a very deep connection. It's something pretty singular, and it's not, you know, I don't want that to go away for sure.
Okay. Over in the back. You. Oh.
There really wasn't. It was really, the backstory was that she just had not, you know, whether she had been addicted to drugs maybe, or just was checked out for whatever reason, but she really just couldn't. She was just a bad mom. She wasn't a good mom when they were growing up either, and just kind of absent. And then ended up finding a stepdad and kind of going into a whole new family, moving to Arizona, and just, you know, disappearing, and really no support for him during that whole time in jail. And so she just, you know, there occasionally the sad but true truth is that some folks have to write off their parents if, you know, it's just or other relatives, you know, if it's just a really, so he had done that, you know, who knows if she'll come back around, but I kind of doubt it. Here's another one right there, yeah. You mentioned the budget a couple times. I was just wondering, as a filmmaker, what is something for the budget? Food for the crew. Absolutely. No, food and any accommodations. In fact, I was really worried about the budget for, you know, that the art department was going to have enough budget and there wasn't going to be enough staff, and I was really a little concerned that everybody was be overworked, and, you know, but it was kind of remarkable how well the crew was treated, and they told me again and again, they were like, "Wow, we're really," like my friend John Lavin, who's done a lot of production design for me for my last several films, and he was like, "Lynn, we're really being well taken care of," and and they made the lunches really fun. They got all these donations of like local artisanal chocolatiers and all kinds of little, you know, gift cards and things. And they would have a door raffle every day at lunch. And another, you know, and it was the thing that's nice about that size, a small crew, is that it gets so intimate and so family-like. And one of my favorite stories is that we had a break somewhere. It was like after the first week of work, maybe, or something. And I asked the sound mixer what he'd done. He came up from LA, so he just stuck around Marysville or wherever their hotel was up there, and just hung out up there for the weekend. And he said, "Well, I started writing these haiku." and he started, and he was writing haiku for like each person on the crew, and different and so people started finding out, and then they started writing haiku. So everybody was writing haikus, and at the craft services table there was this communal haiku notebook. And by the end we had this, it was adorable, and they were so cute, you know. Everyone was about a incident on set, you know, that everybody knew about, you know, or about or like a little tribute to a person, you know, a personality on the set. It was just a perfect sort of example of, you know, how sweet this crew was. It was really, really fun experience. Thank you.
He wished he was part of the crew eating the stuff. Okay.
You do. Yeah, did she break into that house? Yeah, she did. And the idea was that she sort of creates creative, you know, acts of random creativity, you know. So it was sort of a little mislead. So the idea was that you would think, and there was a whole other scene that we actually ended up cutting because it just wasn't working, and we found we didn't really need it ultimately. But another house break-in scene that you thought that there was going to be something nefarious, that she was going to be a vandalizer, or she was going to steal something or whatever. And then you found out she was just like this weird secret artist who just had to, just to kind of be a little, little mischievous. But it was the idea would somebody would come home and find their living room completely rearranged, and the furniture upside down and strange things, and she's actually inspired by a friend that I had, a dear friend I had in high school, who was like that, who just had this really odd, very creative. What?
Did the chairs like that?
No, he didn't do anything like that specifically. He had a whole other sort of line of things that he would do, but it wasn't for attention. He didn't even identify himself as an artist. It was just something that he had to kind of do. It was really interesting. So that always stuck with me, and I always loved that idea. And since Hildy, I wanted her to, have this deeper, inner life. And she's hiding it, right? So nobody knows. She's just a total lone wolf, and her mom doesn't know, and nobody knows. And so it's a big deal when she is vulnerable and shows Chris, and then when her mom finds out at the end, it's like, oh, I don't know you at all, in this really heartbreaking kind of moment.
Right. Do you find her similar to the character that Ellen Page played in Touchy Feely?
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, I think there might be some parallels. I mean, I think that the Ellen Page character is definitely more of a depressive and a dark place, and she's a little older. She's she's in her early 20s, and so she's a little bit more. It's a little sadder because she's definitely in a very codependent relationship with her dad, and it's.
Who's a dentist?
Who's a dentist? That's Josh Pais is incredible in that film, but but I could see how there's definitely some daughter parent dynamics being explored there for sure. Anybody else?
Okay. Over there. Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, okay. You were looking there.
Sorry.
Two things. First of all, I really love the music. How did you engage that musician? And secondly, you had like 100 people for background. Was that like just literally the background people?
Yeah, it really was. It was all the background extras lived in the town. So we embedded ourselves in this little actual hamlet in the Cascades. Foothills of the Cascade Mountains in Washington State, about an hour and a half, hour 45 minutes, sort of northeast of Seattle. And I really wanted it to be not urban. I wanted it to be sort of economically depressed. You could feel the struggle of the people in the town. And we embedded ourselves. Our base camp was in the American Legion Hall, and every location 90% of locations were between half a block and 3 blocks away. So we would just like head off with our equipment to a house or a pizzeria or wherever it was. And the whole town knew us by the end of the shoot. And they were so supportive and so sweet. And, I don't think we paid any of them. So I think that was their payment, was basically that we gave that background, we gave them credit because, that was what we had to offer. And they were happy to do it. They were it was so sweet. So Andrew Bird is the composer. And the other question was about how I engaged with him. And he was somebody that he has lots and lots of music. He has this sort of niche audience. He was originally in Chicago, and now he lives in LA. But he has a strong, loyal fan base for it veers between popular music, but he has some albums that are purely instrumental. And he's a verifiable genius. I mean, he actually was all analog. He played all those instruments. He's a genius. And I used his music as the temporary soundtrack before my composer I was working with at the time came in to replace it. I used all of his music as I was editing this movie, Touchy Feely, and I got really into him and his stuff, and it's very cinematic and very evocative. And then, that was all replaced except for the final end credits scene. The final end credits, I had a song I really wanted to use of his, and I found a friend of a friend who helped me get in touch with him. And then another one, he was hard to get a hold of, but I finally did. And I sort of begged and pleaded, and he let me use that song. And then he saw the film Touchy Feely at Sundance. That was, I think, 2013, and really loved it. And we met, and we basically just said, well, let's keep in touch because maybe there will be a film someday that we'll want to work on together. And so I actually gave this to him really early on in the development process of the treatment and said, I think this might be the one, And I don't know exactly if I'm more excited about people seeing the film in the theaters, when it comes out to the broader world on Friday, or just for people to hear the soundtrack. I love the soundtrack so much, and I have to say, it physically hurt when they cut off the middle of the end credit song, which he wrote for me. It's impossible for me not to sing along. I love it to death. I hope you guys all get a chance to hear the whole thing because it's really spectacular.
Any,
This guy over here on the right.
okay, I'm sorry.
So I had the question, that ability to bring the drama.
Yeah, I've worked with a lot of comedians and comedic actors, and have I found that a lot of them have the ability to do drama. Yeah, Claire Denis was I mentioned her earlier, she's a big influence on me, and she made this, one of my favorite films of hers is called Friday Night, is the English translation, Vendredi Soir, and is the French. And it's basically about a one-night stand. It's very beautiful and very simple, and it's a great, gorgeous film. And the main role is played by a woman who had never done any dramatic acting before. She was a comédienne, a French comedic actress. And she's brilliant. She's absolutely brilliant. And Claire had this quote saying that she really felt like the best comedic actors were all capable of being great dramatic actors, because it's actually much harder to do what they do. And I don't think it's true of everybody. I think there are some who are so broad that they can't make that transition, but there are plenty of great examples of people who really can, and ones who can go super broad too. I mean, Ben's a great example, Ben Schwartz, who played the younger brother, Catherine Hahn, Michaela Watkins are other great examples of people who can just be incredibly great, grounded, dramatic performers, but also the funniest people you've ever seen in your life, So, yeah, I truly believe that it's in most. Yeah, and especially if Ben really wanted to do a dramatic role, and I knew that. And he had sort of told me early on that he would love to work with me someday. So that was an easy call, and he was a great addition.
Is Allison Janney funny? Because you used her in a film.
God, yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, that was some of the funniest, the laughter that I've had, the most laughter I've ever had on a set was her and Josh Peiss improvising when she's trying to teach him Reiki in Touchy Feely. There's so much we didn't use in the outtakes of that film on the DVD, or just like, that was one of them, that they would just go on, they would riff and riff and riff, and then we'd all just be dying, and then as soon as we would say cut, everybody could not stop. We all crying. It was so funny. She's really funny.
I want to ask you in closing again about something we touched on earlier at the start of the film, which is about your school days here and what that meant to you, and what that was like, if you want to share a little bit.
Well, it was interesting because I had been looking at different, the work I was doing when I entered the school, when I had the body of work that I sort of applied with, was very sort of Vivian Maier, Helen Levitt. It was very, sort of black and white street photography, and I'm so grateful that I didn't go to a program, because I remember Yale at the time was sort of all about the fine print, and it was all about the darkroom technique, which didn't last much longer beyond the 90s, I'm imagining, although maybe it's still the same. What do I know? Probably not. But anyway, the thing that I really appreciated about that program that Charles Trub had engineered, the MFA program in photography and related media, it was what it was called at the time, they added video later, is that it was very open, as long as it engaged with the image. We were starting to work digitally. At the time, it was like the first version of Photoshop, which was shit, but so the tools were still a little rough, but it was all, they really urged you to explore. And so I made 3 films when I was in that program. Everybody else was making photographs, and I was making films. And so I was just and I took cultural theory classes and feminist theory and all these things that I just really opened up my whole world, and I loved how I was allowed to take classes in other departments as well. So I took a lot of BFA classes.
Are all your films personal, would you say? Or
Yeah.
I know this one, I got the feeling it's one a little less so, the new one? Or?
Well, they all, this is very personal too. I definitely bring my own stuff. Probably the most directly personal is the daughter character, because she was based on a friend of mine that I've been wanting to put on screen for a long time. But also, I don't know. I think when I'm writing a character, I'm always bringing some part of myself to the character. And there are some that are much more direct, like touchy-feely. I feel like in my very first film, We Go Way Back, were really came from autobiographical places in a lot of ways, emotionally. But even the ones like Hump Day, Your Sister's Sister, and this one, even though some of these experiences are not ones that I could directly relate to my own life, and they're more observational, but I'm still using my own lens to get into the character. I don't know how to explain it. They all feel personal to me, though, yeah.
Right. I hope everyone here goes to see or watches online We Go Way Back, because it's really interesting. One is your first film, but also the concept is of a young girl, Kate, at 13, writing to herself, who's older, and then the older person at 23 reading the letters that the younger one wrote.
And then they both hang out together.
Yeah. So you got to watch
little
the
twist
movie
of magic
to see how
surrealism,
it
but yeah,
happens.
yeah. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Really.
And most important is the movie opens on the 30th?
Yeah,
right?
at the Quad.
So go and see it.
So please tell your friends. Thank you so much.
Thank you.